Alrighty, we'll get started then. I am Paul Miles with the International Society for Biblical Hermeneutics, and this is a talk, Israel and the Ice Age, Interpreting Geology and Geography with the Masoretic Text, as part of the ISBH series on Israel and the Church. So in this talk, we'll divide it into three parts. First, we'll look at the text and the context that is pertinent to the discussion. And then we will look at the Noahic flood and how that worked. And then we will examine the post-flood Ice Age. So this is the key text for today. It is Deuteronomy 32:8. I'll read verses 7 through 9 from the Masoretic Text. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you, your elders, and they will tell you. When the Most High divided their inheritance to the nations, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the boundaries of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. For the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob is the place of his inheritance. Now I'm currently at an airport, and the interim is running. Are you able to hear me right now? Can someone drop a note in the box there? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Great. Appreciate you. Okay. We will resume then. Sorry about that brief interruption. Okay, so this is according to the Masoretic text. However, there is a textual variant here in verse 8. According to the Masoretic text, we have, according to the number of the children of Israel, B'nai Israel. Now, in other textual variants, we have Codex Vaticanus, which is a testimony to the Septuagint. We have, according to the number of the angels of God. And in 4Q Deut J, which is part of the Qumran text, the Dead Sea Scrolls, we see, according to the number of the sons of God, B'nai Elohim. Now, presumably, these variants would point to the division of the land being according to the number of the fallen angels or the angelic realm. Support of this theologically can come from the book of Daniel, where we see the Archangel Michael wrestling with the Prince of Persia, that is to say, the fallen angel who is over Persia. This is a good indicator that demons are organized in a way that relates to nations and countries. However, this is not necessarily the best reading. One problem with this interpretation is the sheer number of angels. Jesus had access to more than 12 legions of angels, according to Matthew 26:53. And Daniel 10:20 speaks of the singular Prince of Persia and the singular Prince of Greece. So that would be a whole lot of fallen angels. If each of them ended up with a individual country, it would be very difficult to see how we have so few countries coming out of that. That's one difficulty. And then a response to that might be that if you look at B'nai Yisrael in the Westminster Leningrad Codex on Bible Gateway, you're going to get 502 hits. So it's very easy to go from an Elohim to an Israel on this concept. So there is reason to accept this. There are conservatives that do. One reason that I don't is that one of the main texts would be the Septuagint, but the Septuagint itself is not unified on the matter. There are several manuscripts of the Septuagint, as well as many quotes of people using the Septuagint, wherein we see variants that would affirm the Sons of Israel textual variant, which shows that it's not necessarily unique to the Masoretic text, which was a bit later. It seems that there is indeed a historical lineage of the Sons of Israel. Another reason is that we see it in other versions outside of the Septuagint or the Masoretic text. Of course, we see it in the Peshitta translation. We see a number of the children of Israel there. Peshitta being another Semitic language, being an Aramaic group, tends to give some value to the textual variant. But the textual variant that I think is particularly noteworthy is this one. It's from the Samaritan Pentateuch, which affirms according to the number of the children of Israel. Now, the Samaritan Pentateuch is notorious for taking Israel out of key passages. It would be very odd for the Samaritan Pentateuch to have had, according to B'nai Elohim, for several generations, and then eventually adjusted away from that to B'nai Israel to align with the Masoretic Text. This would be entirely unanticipated. And a final argument in favor of the Masoretic Text would be the context. Verse 9 has, "For the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob is the place of his inheritance." Okay, so we see then that whenever God divided the nations, he set the boundaries for the people according then to the number of the children of Israel. Okay, so we see then Israel is kind of the leading factor in God's purpose for setting up physical boundaries on land the way that he has today. That's the text. Now, what is the context for all of this? Broadly speaking, we're getting out of Genesis 6 through 8, which tells us about the global flood. From there in Genesis 9, we get the Noahic covenant, which is an ongoing covenant for all men. It continues on to today. In Genesis 11, we get the narrative of the Tower of Babel. Genesis 10 inserts the record of the various nations that came out of that. And then whenever we get into Genesis 12 through 25, that's when we get Abraham. So Genesis 32:8 is speaking of this event right here. When God dispersed the sons of Adam, that would be a reference to this event. And it was at this time that he numbered them according to the number of the children of Israel, which is a promise that would come to Abraham in the next chapter. So one immediate response that people have to the textual variant is, let's say, see, there was not an Israel yet, so God could not have divided the land according to the number of Israel. However, I would point out that right here in the very next chapter, God is making a promise to Abraham to give him many children. Even though God has not given many sons of Israel yet, God is fully aware of how many there will be. So I think it is quite viable that this was indeed God's intention to divide the land according to the coming descendants of Abraham. Okay. So that is the text and the context. Now, let's talk about what happened there at the Noahic flood. For this discussion, it's convenient to be a little familiar with the geologic timescale. So we have the Cenozoic, the Mesozoic, and the Paleozoic eras. And the Precambrian here refers to the vast geological eon that occurs before the Cambrian period, which is down here. Now, this is a chart that comes from the Geological Society of America. We're going to break up the chart a little bit, and then we're going to stack them on top of each other. So the way that this works is whenever you cut into some rocks, you'll see several layers. And one of the fundamental principles in geology is the principle of superposition, which says that the oldest layers are on the bottom and then younger layers are on top. Did I say the oldest layers were laid down, and then after that, layers were stacked on top? So this is a trustworthy thing. We can get the relative age of rocks. That is the age in comparison to each other, right? It's not that these rocks were laid down and then somebody snuck in this little rock here. Relative to each other, these are more recently laid down than these. Now, a mistake that we don't want to make is uniformitarianism. Uniformitarianism would say that if we look at the current rate of rocks being laid down and decaying away, we can extract how long ago the rocks that are at the bottom were laid. We hold to instead catastrophism, which says that many layers may have been laid down in a very brief period of time. For example, during the Noahic flood. Okay. So here are our layers. Now, if we look at the conventional chronology and how old they say that everything is, and we inflate the various chunks according to how old they're supposed to be, we end up with something like this. The Precambrian is alleged to be 4,000 million years old, or 4 billion years old, followed by the Paleozoic, which is 289 million, Mesozoic 186 million, and Cenozoic way up here is only 66 million. I think that there are some problems with the numbers. Again, the relative dating is correct, right? Paleozoic is on top of Precambrian. However, I think we can say that the Precambrian, if we follow the Masoretic Text, only lasted for 1,656 years. That's what God created the earth as with the Garden of Eden. And then we have a flood event, which occurs over the course of about a year, during which time the Mesozoic and the Paleozoic is laid down. And then finally, the post-flood era is this Cenozoic, and it's been going for about 5,500. So if we adjust the size of the charts on the left, we'll end up with something like this, right? Precambrian was a pretty long period, and then the two in the middle was a very quick laying down of layers during the flood. And since then, human history has been going through the Cenozoic. All right, so what does this look like? So how did these layers get laid down, right? So the first one is the Paleozoic. There are debates as to where exactly which layer of rock was put there by God during the creation week, but there's a pretty good consensus that it was right around here at the Precambrian here, right? Now, this would be what God put down. It's what Adam and Eve walked on, and it's what all of the critters and people were walking on from Adam to the time of Noah. It is here that Noah begins building an ark, presumably on dry land. Okay. Then all the animals enter the ark, and the flood event occurs. Now, the flood event has a couple of things happening. One is the rain coming down, but also we see the fountains of the great deep bursting forth and water coming up from the earth. So as this happens, the water goes up. It also shifts around earth underneath, and rocks start squishing around and mountains start forming, and various animals and people start trying to climb up to higher ground to survive. Not everybody makes it. Some are less equipped for the climb up for survival than others. And the flood continues, and more rock gets deposited, and more animals succumb and are deposited into the rocks, where they eventually become fossilized, and eventually everything is covered in water. Everybody dies, and then slowly but surely the ark begins to rest on dry land. And then the last little bit of rock is finally laid down. Then Noah exits the ark, and that's where we get the Noahic covenant. And then he moves on. But the earth continues forming after the flood, with various catastrophes that are still occurring due to shifting rock plates, due to weather catastrophes happening after all of this, and so forth. So the earth continues to form after the flood. Okay, so that's a brief summary of how the Noahic flood works. Next, we'll discuss how the post-flood ice age looked. There was a lot of climate change that occurred after the flood. There's been a lot of climate change that occurred relative to the times of Abraham and others. Now, there are a couple of mistakes we don't want to make when we talk about climate change. The first is to assume that we are on the path to a catastrophe. Here's an article in the New York magazine here, in which the claim was made that the earth is going to become uninhabitable. All humans all flesh are going to die from the earth due to climate change that we are responsible for. Now, we know that this claim is incorrect because God has said that he will continue having men on earth until the eventual eschatological interference and the destruction of this planet and the replacement with new heavens and the new earth. So we can cross that one out. Unfortunately, some people have gone to an extreme of rejecting this view of climate change to the extent that they are not accepting climate change at all, and they're denying climate change. I think that this is a mistake. For one reason, I think that we can look at some climate change data related to the past and see that it is actually quite possible that God used climate change for his purposes in the past. So here are two articles that have come out. One from the journal Climate Change, one from Science Advances. No reason to believe that these authors are Christians. They may be. I think that would be great if they are. But they're talking about the rise and fall of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Now, what is the Neo-Assyrian Empire? That's the empire that we read about in the Bible that came and conquered Israel, the northern kingdom there, during that period of apostasy. And it seems that there is reason to believe that there was climate change involved. Climate change that made it favorable for the Neo-Assyrian Empire to rise, and climate change that was contributing to its demise as well. God, having control over the climate, very well may have used the climate in his progression of bringing up the Neo-Assyrian Empire and breaking it back down. So we shouldn't be too surprised if God has done this elsewhere as well. And we shouldn't be too surprised if climate change is occurring today. Okay, so with that little disclaimer aside, that climate change is very well likely to be part of our discussion, let's talk about another issue in creationism. There is a question about flood boundaries. Now, when I say flood boundaries, I'm not saying that the flood did not cover the whole earth, and we're only talking about boundaries somewhere in the ancient Near East where a flood did occur. I'm speaking specifically of where in the geological time frame here did the flood occur. I'm working with the assumption that the pre-flood flood boundary is right here. Toward the end of the Precambrian and right there at the beginning of the Cambrian explosion. I think that the creation could explain some of the phenomenon there, and there are other creationists who would agree, and there are some differences. Some would say a little bit lower, a little bit higher. No big deal there. I'm also working with the assumption that the final layer of rock that was laid down was up here at the KPG boundary, if you will. Okay, the Cretaceous Paleogene. So down here is where the flood begins. Up here is where the flood ends, meaning everything right here in the middle are all flood deposits. Now, I am not going to support these claims. For one thing, the lower flood boundary is not particularly relevant to our discussion. The upper flood boundary is, but I'm not going to defend where it was precisely down here at the KPG. Several competent creationists would put it higher, some maybe even lower. Instead, what I want to do is I want to build a case that it was at least as low as this, the Preobonian layer. All right. I believe it's down here, but I'm going to prove that it was at least here, probably lower. All right. For our purposes, this will suffice. All right. So how do I intend to do this? Here we have the paleo biodb.org, the paleobiology database. And what this does is it aligns various fossils according to different colors, as we see down here, according to different rock layers. And it's put on a map showing where that particular fossil was found. So here we have Blatodea, which is like cockroaches, right? And those nasty little buggers are all over the place. You see them across the landscape. You see them in America and Europe and Asia and Africa and South America. Okay, so they're dispersed that way, but they're also dispersed vertically, right? You see some that are relatively new here in the more yellow regions, and then you see them down in like the red Permian areas, okay? Now, I'm of the opinion that the Permian era, right, these eras right here, these periods and all, were all put down during the flood, so they're not probably as old as a lot of people think they are. But relatively, they are put there. They are older than the yellow guys. Okay, yeah, you get my drift there. You see how the map works. Okay, now this is not very informative for where the flood occurred. So let's turn our attention then to North American antelope. Here are some cool pictures of antelope from the families Antilocapidae and Maricoicodontidea. Uh, this guy right here happens to be my favorite because I think that the horns are really cool. Now, currently in North America, the only antelope that we have running around natively is the pronghorn antelope, which is from the family Antilocapidae. So let's take a look at these two groups that we're grouping together as they are dispersed in the fossil record across the world. We see that they are all located right here in this range of the United States. Here are the filters of the two groups that we put in. Now let's zoom in a little bit. There we go. All right, so here they are in the Paleogene, right? So after the flood, we can be a little bit more specific and go right here to the Preobonian. It seems that the Preobonian is the earliest that we start getting fossils of North American antelope, right? Now, if we go further on into newer and newer levels, we see that there is a continuity of antelope from these two groups within the same period, right? And they go through today. And like I say, you can wander around in the Western United States and see those beautiful antelope to this day, who are descendants from the guys that we see in fossil records. So going back to our timeline here, we are seeing antelope continuity beginning at least down here in the Preobonian and going all the way up. So what does that tell us? That tells us that at least from the Preobonian onward has been post-flood. If the flood occurs after the Preobonian, then that would imply that antelopes lived in that area in America prior to the flood, and then they entered the ark and went through the flood, and then they got out of the ark after the flood, and they returned to America to visit their ancestral homelands. Now that ain't no kind of behavior for an antelope. It would be very odd for such behavior to ensue. So I'm going to work with the assumption then that that is at least where we have post-flood rock layers happening. Okay, so we've established then that this is all post-flood. Now, the next question is, where do we see human fossils? To answer that question, first we need to ask the question of what is a human fossil? What exactly is a human? This is a topic that some creation scientists have explored, and they've come up with a couple of methods for identifying human fossils in the fossil record. One is through various methods of barometrological distance measuring. This is the nerdy methods by which they take various measurements of human skeletons and they compare that to other skeletons and they compare it to known non-human skeletons to try to come up with groupings of various fossils that are reasonably positioned as being part of the human created kind. That's one way about it, and there are various measurements being taken of various animals all over the place. However, there is something unique that we can do when we look specifically at the remains of humans. Ross, Brummel, and Wood have presented a paper right here. You can visit it online. It's available at the Cedarville University website. I got to see it presented. It's pretty cool. And they've developed another model in which they can do paleoanthropological evidence of advanced cognition. What does this mean? Well, being as how humans are created in the image of God, we humans do things that other animals do not. And they've identified these 6 categories of evidence of advanced human cognition: controlled use of fire, the manufacture of advanced tools, the crafting of unnecessary objects that attest to artistic creativity or preferences, care for the wounded or elderly, intentional burial of the dead, and complex behaviors associated with dispersal or even exploration, such as accessing cave chambers far from cave entrance or accessing islands. In other words, animals don't use fire. Hence, all of the drama in the Jungle Book about the animals trying to get them to use fire. Right? They might make very basic tools, but they're not going to chip together stones and form a glue to hold that together in order to make a tool. Right? So, using evidence like this, we can look at fossils and the spots where they were to understand, oh, okay, these guys that lived here were actually human because they're doing art and they're using fire. Okay, so if we use these two processes, the previously mentioned parametrical distance kind of stuff, as well as this information coming from advanced human cognition, then we can take the fossils that have been identified as most likely human and revisit the database and see that they are being dispersed right up here in the Pleistocene period. Okay, so it seems that the Pleistocene is where the earliest human dispersion occurs using those. Now, if we include Homo sapiens in this search, we will see an even greater dispersion. But presumably these guys are a bit earlier than Homo sapiens. Okay, so it seems then that being as how we have continuity here of being after the flood, and we see human dispersion happening here, we can accept that this is a post-flood human dispersion. Some people will try to take Neanderthal or this guy or Homo erectus or that or the other and say it's a pre-flood. No, this is post-flood, and it attests to the dispersion at the Tower of Babel. Now, we've already mentioned that it was at the Tower of Babel that this setting of the boundaries of man occurred, according to Deuteronomy 32:8 in the Masoretic there. So, being as how the dispersion occurs in the Pleistocene, the next question is, what did the world look like during the Pleistocene? Here is a map of Earth as it appeared at the peak of the last glacial maximum during the late Pleistocene. Okay, so it was an ice age. We see a lot of ice up top here. Now, one of the concerns that we have about global warming today is that if the Earth becomes warmer, the ice caps are going to melt. And if the ice caps melt, then the water levels are going to rise, and that's going to sink a bunch of cities. Well, the opposite would also be true. If we have more ice, then we have less water. And so we can zoom in and see, for example, over here, there is now a land bridge connecting Asia down into Indonesia there. So humans would have been able to walk across ice as well as across land in order to get around the Earth. So it seems that this is what the Earth looked like around the time that people were dispersing from the Tower of Babel. Now, I say that this is the glacial maximum. It could be that the Tower of Babel dispersion actually occurred a little bit earlier, so that as man is dispersing, God is still increasing the glaciers, increasing land bridges, making it more viable for men to get around the planet. So that's what it looks like around the time that men start to disperse. Now, as they get around, we start approaching a planet that looks kind of like this. This is a little bit more familiar, right? So once man crosses certain land bridges, once he gets across certain ice bridges, once he gets across bodies of water that are navigable whenever there's more land and more ice, then God starts to melt the ice age down a little bit, and we start to see a planet like this, and there are more natural boundaries between men. Now, this is just what it looks like if you zoom out from the planet a bit further away. If we take a geopolitical map with the boundaries, it's going to look something like this. Now, if you look at the boundaries between countries, very frequently they can be described as being squiggly, to use the technical verbiage. They are squiggly because there are rivers there. Rivers which very frequently, I think, came about after the Pleistocene Ice Age. So it seems that God has made it to where we have natural boundaries between countries by nature. Now, sometimes you get a straight line here. And if you look at what's happening here, it's a giant desert and there's kind of an expanse that's going to be difficult to get across. But very frequently, we're seeing natural boundaries. I think that part of the reasons that we have natural boundaries is because God's design for countries is that they be a parcel of land with people in the land and a civil government for the protection of the people in the land. It happens that whenever you have a river separating two countries, that river makes it difficult to get across if you have ill intent. We see it in ancient Greek pottery. We see battles going on there. It's always been a kill zone. Even to this day, we have army manuals about how to get across a river. It's a real intentional and difficult effort to get across because if you're trying to get across, it's a giant danger zone and the guys can pick you off as you come. However, if you're trying to cross in peace, it's still quite navigable. A river is a challenge if you're getting shot at, but if you're not, you really just kind of need a boat, right? So whenever the Bible says that God divided the countries according to the number of the children of Israel, I think what he had in mind was that Israel could be a light to the nations so that they could still get out and about and tell the world about God. Now, of course, Israel still has a future in God's plan, and I think that part of the future Messianic kingdom is going to have more land changes, if you will. And the church has not replaced Israel in any of these plans for the coming future. However, now the church is on a mission similar to what Israel had, with some very key distinctives that the church is now on a mission to be a light to the world, to bring the gospel to people. And I think God has designed the planet in a way that we can do just that while still having barriers to protect countries from foreign invaders. Okay. So we've taken a look at the text and context of Deuteronomy 32:8. We looked at the Noahic flood and the post-flood age. This is why I believe that God has used the Ice Age for the benefit of Israel, with Israel kind of at the center of his attention for those efforts. Okay, I will turn off the recording now and we'll open the forum for discussion.